The psychology of intermittent reinforcement and learned helplessness. Why do people sometimes continue investing extraordinary amounts of time, energy, and hope into situations that rarely reward them? Why do some relationships, careers, financial pursuits, or personal ambitions remain psychologically compelling even when success appears increasingly uncertain? Common sense would suggest that consistent rewards should be the most motivating. Yet decades of psychological research suggest something far more surprising. Under many conditions, unpredictable rewards can become even more powerful than predictable ones. To understand why people sometimes persist far beyond reason, we must first understand one of the most influential principles in behavioral psychology, known as intermittent reinforcement. Behavior is shaped by consequences. Actions followed by rewarding outcomes are generally more likely to be repeated, while actions followed by no meaningful reward gradually become less frequent. This simple observation became one of the foundations of modern behavioral psychology through the work of psychologist B.F. Skinner. Skinner demonstrated that behavior is not guided solely by conscious decision-making. It is continually influenced by patterns of reinforcement that teach the nervous system what is worth repeating. At first glance, reinforcement appears straightforward. If every successful action receives a reward, learning occurs quickly. A student who receives encouragement after mastering new material often becomes motivated to continue studying. An athlete who experiences steady improvement through practice usually remains committed to training. Consistent feedback creates a clear relationship between effort and outcome. The nervous system begins expecting that meaningful action produces meaningful results. Surprisingly, however, consistent reinforcement is not always the strongest force maintaining behavior over long periods of time. Research in behavioral psychology has repeatedly shown that behavior rewarded only occasionally may become remarkably persistent. When rewards arrive unpredictably, individuals often continue investing effort long after someone receiving consistent rewards might have stopped. This phenomenon is known as intermittent reinforcement. Imagine two gardeners planting seeds. One gardener knows that every healthy plant will bloom exactly as expected. The other receives blossoms only occasionally, without knowing which seed will produce flowers or when they will appear. Although the first gardener enjoys certainty, the second may become even more invested. Every new seed carries the possibility of success. Every day offers another opportunity for an unexpected reward. The uncertainty itself begins holding attention. This tendency reflects an important feature of the human nervous system. The brain is not designed merely to experience rewards. It is designed to predict them. Whenever reality differs from expectation, attention increases. Unexpected outcomes receive greater psychological processing because they may contain information that improves future predictions. Modern neuroscience often describes this process through the concept of prediction error. When an unexpected reward appears, the brain treats it as highly significant because it violates previous expectations. Rather than reducing motivation, uncertainty can sometimes strengthen it. This helps explain why unpredictable experiences often become so psychologically captivating. A writer continues submitting manuscripts because one acceptance may arrive unexpectedly. An entrepreneur continues developing new ideas because the next opportunity may change everything. An investor continues watching the market because tomorrow may produce entirely different results. The possibility of future success keeps attention engaged even when recent experience has been disappointing. Behavioral psychologists have studied this process through what are known as variable schedules of reinforcement. Instead of rewarding every successful action, rewards occur at unpredictable intervals or after an unpredictable number of attempts. Because the next reward cannot be anticipated, behavior often becomes more resistant to giving up. The nervous system remains engaged because certainty has been replaced by possibility. Importantly, intermittent reinforcement is neither inherently good nor inherently harmful. It represents a basic learning process found throughout everyday life. Scientific discovery depends upon repeated experiments that often fail before producing meaningful breakthroughs. Creative work frequently involves long periods without obvious success, followed by moments of extraordinary insight. Athletic achievement emerges through countless training sessions before measurable improvement becomes visible. Many of humanity's greatest accomplishments require persistence despite uncertain outcomes. The psychological challenge emerges when uncertainty begins replacing healthy feedback. In situations where rewards become increasingly inconsistent without corresponding opportunities for genuine progress, the nervous system may continue investing enormous effort because it has learned that success remains possible even if it is unpredictable. Hope remains active because occasional positive experiences continue suggesting that persistence will eventually be rewarded. This is one reason uncertainty can become so psychologically consuming. A predictable outcome, even if disappointing, eventually allows attention to move elsewhere. An uncertain outcome keeps the mind engaged. Questions remain unanswered. Possibilities remain open. The imagination begins supplying countless future scenarios, each competing for attention. Instead of bringing closure, uncertainty encourages continued emotional investment. Researchers have also observed that unpredictability influences memory itself. Unexpected positive experiences are often remembered with greater intensity than ordinary, predictable ones. A rare moment of success can overshadow many ordinary disappointments because the emotional contrast makes it especially memorable. The mind naturally returns to these experiences when evaluating whether continued effort remains worthwhile. Hope becomes anchored not only in present circumstances, but also in vivid memories of unexpected rewards. At this stage, persistence often appears entirely reasonable. After all, history is filled with examples of individuals who achieved remarkable success only because they refused to abandon difficult goals. The challenge lies in distinguishing between situations where persistence remains adaptive and situations where persistence gradually becomes detached from realistic opportunities for meaningful progress. Psychology does not suggest that perseverance is inherently misguided. Rather, it asks under what conditions perseverance serves growth, and under what conditions it begins serving only the expectation that another unpredictable reward may eventually appear. This distinction becomes increasingly important because intermittent reinforcement has a remarkable ability to delay discouragement. As long as occasional rewards continue appearing, hope often survives. The individual remains emotionally invested because the next positive outcome always seems possible. Yet an important question remains unanswered. What happens when repeated effort continues but meaningful control over the outcome gradually disappears? What happens when persistence no longer produces genuine influence, and the nervous system slowly begins learning that action itself may no longer matter? To answer that question, we must examine one of the most influential concepts in modern psychology, the development of learned helplessness. Part 2. When persistence becomes helplessness. If intermittent reinforcement helps explain why people continue investing effort despite uncertainty, learned helplessness helps explain why that effort may eventually disappear altogether. These two concepts are often presented separately within psychology, yet together they describe a remarkable progression. One explains persistence in the face of uncertainty. The other explains resignation after repeated experiences of uncontrollable failure. Understanding the transition between them reveals one of the most important ways the nervous system learns from experience. The concept of learned helplessness was introduced through the pioneering work of psychologist Martin Seligman and his colleagues during the late 20th century. Their research explored how repeated exposure to situations perceived as uncontrollable influenced later behavior. While the original experiments became highly influential, the broader idea has since been expanded through decades of research examining human motivation, cognition, resilience, and emotional adaptation. The central insight remains remarkably simple. When repeated experience teaches the nervous system that effort has little influence over important outcomes, motivation gradually begins to decline. This idea challenges a common assumption about human behavior. We often believe people stop trying because they are weak, lazy, or lacking determination. Psychology suggests a more complicated explanation. Human beings are naturally motivated to act when they believe their actions matter. Motivation is strengthened when effort reliably influences results. When that relationship repeatedly breaks down, the nervous system begins conserving energy by reducing effort. What appears to be a failure of character may instead represent a learned expectation that action is no longer effective. Imagine someone attempting to open a locked door. At first, they try several different keys. They examine the lock carefully. They search for another entrance. Their behavior reflects the assumption that persistence will eventually produce success. Now imagine that every possible solution consistently fails despite sincere effort. After enough unsuccessful attempts, something begins changing. The individual no longer experiments with new strategies. They no longer search for alternatives. Eventually, they may stop approaching the door altogether, not because they have become incapable of opening it, but because experience has taught them that trying appears pointless. The nervous system is constantly searching for patterns connecting action and consequence. This process is fundamental to learning. Infants discover that reaching produces contact. Students discover that studying improves understanding. Craftsmen discover that practice develops skill. These repeated experiences create what psychologists often describe as a sense of agency, the expectation that personal action meaningfully influences the surrounding world. Agency encourages exploration because the individual believes that effort changes outcomes. Learned helplessness develops when this expectation gradually erodes. Instead of learning that effort creates change, the nervous system begins learning that outcomes appear largely independent of personal action. Every unsuccessful attempt strengthens the expectation that future attempts will produce similar results. Eventually, the problem extends beyond the original situation. The individual may begin approaching entirely new challenges with diminished confidence because previous experience has altered their expectations about control itself. This transition rarely occurs suddenly. Intermittent reinforcement often delays it. As long as occasional rewards continue appearing, hope remains psychologically alive. A rare success interrupts discouragement and encourages another attempt. The nervous system continues investing effort because uncertainty still contains possibility. Yet if meaningful success becomes increasingly rare while failure remains frequent, hope slowly begins losing its organizing influence. The same uncertainty that once encouraged persistence now begins producing exhaustion. One reason this shift is so powerful is that human beings naturally seek explanations for important events. When repeated efforts fail, people begin asking why. Some conclude that circumstances are unusually difficult. Others conclude that additional learning or different strategies are required. Under prolonged conditions of uncontrollable failure, however, another explanation sometimes emerges. Individuals begin believing the problem exists within themselves. They conclude that nothing they do will ever matter because they themselves are somehow inadequate. Later work by Seligman and other researchers emphasized the importance of these explanatory styles. Two individuals may experience similar setbacks, yet reach very different conclusions. One interprets failure as temporary, specific, and changeable. The other interprets it as permanent, widespread, and personal. These different interpretations profoundly influence future motivation. The event itself matters, but the meaning attached to the event often determines whether persistence continues or gradually disappears. Attention also changes during this process. Early persistence is characterized by curiosity. The individual searches for new possibilities, alternative solutions, and overlooked opportunities. As helplessness develops, attention narrows. Rather than searching for possibilities, the mind begins anticipating failure. The nervous system devotes increasing resources to predicting disappointment, instead of discovering opportunity. Hope gradually gives way to expectation. Memory reinforces this transition. Successful experiences become psychologically distant, while repeated disappointments become increasingly accessible. The mind begins constructing a narrative organized around limitation rather than possibility. Every new setback appears to confirm what previous setbacks have already suggested. Confidence weakens not because ability has necessarily changed, but because accumulated experience has altered expectations about what effort can accomplish. This progression helps explain why learned helplessness often extends beyond the original environment in which it developed. Someone repeatedly exposed to uncontrollable circumstances in one area of life may become hesitant in situations where meaningful control actually exists. New opportunities are approached cautiously because the nervous system generalizes lessons learned from previous experience. The expectation of failure begins shaping behavior before failure has even occurred. Importantly, learned helplessness should not be understood as an irreversible condition. The very name reminds us that it is learned. What has been learned through repeated experience can also be modified through new experience. This insight represents one of the most hopeful conclusions in modern psychology. The nervous system remains capable of adapting throughout life. Expectations formed under one set of circumstances need not remain permanent when circumstances genuinely change. The relationship between intermittent reinforcement and learned helplessness therefore reveals a fascinating psychological paradox. Uncertainty may keep people striving far longer than predictable rewards alone. Yet if uncertainty gradually gives way to repeated experiences of uncontrollable failure, the same nervous system that once displayed extraordinary persistence may eventually conclude that action itself has lost its value. Hope slowly transforms into resignation, not because the individual has become fundamentally different, but because experience has reshaped their expectations about the relationship between effort and outcome. This raises one final question. If helplessness is learned rather than fixed, how does the nervous system begin recovering its sense of agency? How does a person move from resignation back toward curiosity, confidence, and purposeful action? To answer that question, we must examine how psychology understands the rebuilding of agency and why even the smallest successful actions can begin reversing lessons that once seemed impossible to escape. Part 3. The reconstruction of agency. If learned helplessness develops through repeated experiences in which action appears disconnected from meaningful outcomes, then recovery begins by rebuilding that connection. This insight may be one of the most hopeful contributions of modern psychology. The nervous system is not permanently programmed by past experience. It remains remarkably adaptable throughout life. Just as repeated experiences can teach helplessness, repeated experiences of genuine influence can gradually restore the expectation that personal action matters. This distinction is essential because many people misunderstand helplessness. They believe they have lost motivation when, in reality, they have lost confidence that motivation will produce meaningful results. The problem is not necessarily a lack of desire. It is a disruption in the relationship between effort and expectation. When the nervous system repeatedly learns that action changes nothing, it naturally begins conserving energy. From a psychological perspective, this adaptation is understandable. The challenge lies in helping the mind discover that circumstances have changed and that action once again has the capacity to influence outcomes. Researchers have consistently found that perceived control plays a central role in psychological well-being. Human beings are generally more resilient when they believe their choices make a meaningful difference. This perception does not require complete control over life. Very few situations offer that. Rather, it requires confidence that one's actions can influence at least some important outcomes. Even modest experiences of successful problem-solving begin teaching the nervous system that effort remains worthwhile. Recovery, therefore, rarely begins with dramatic transformation. It usually begins with experiences that are deliberately small, realistic, and achievable, completing a task that has been postponed, learning a new skill, reconnecting with a trusted friend, establishing a healthy daily routine, finishing a project that once felt overwhelming. Each successful experience provides evidence that action can once again produce meaningful consequences. The nervous system gradually updates its expectations through lived experience rather than abstract reassurance. This process reflects a broader principle within psychology. Beliefs are often changed most effectively by experience rather than argument. Someone who has learned through repeated failure that nothing they do matters is unlikely to regain confidence simply because another person tells them to think positively. The nervous system places greater trust in direct evidence. Every genuine success, however modest, becomes another piece of information suggesting that previous conclusions may no longer reflect present reality. Psychologist Albert Bandura described a closely related concept known as self-efficacy. Self-efficacy refers to a person's belief in their ability to organize and carry out actions necessary to achieve desired outcomes. Individuals with stronger self-efficacy are generally more willing to approach difficult challenges because they expect that persistence, learning, and adaptation will eventually improve performance. Importantly, Bandura argued that self-efficacy develops primarily through mastery experiences. Confidence grows from successfully doing difficult things, not merely from believing that success is possible. This understanding also explains why recovery often feels uncomfortable at first. Learned helplessness encourages avoidance because avoidance protects the individual from anticipated disappointment. Rebuilding agency requires moving toward situations where success is uncertain. The nervous system may initially interpret these opportunities as threats because previous experience associated effort with failure. Anxiety during recovery does not necessarily indicate that progress is impossible. It often reflects the nervous system testing new expectations against old learning. Intermittent reinforcement also takes on a different meaning during recovery. Earlier, we examined how unpredictable rewards can sustain persistence even when outcomes remain uncertain. During healthy growth, uncertainty becomes something else entirely. It becomes possibility rather than unpredictability without purpose. The individual no longer waits passively for rare moments of success. They actively create opportunities through consistent action while accepting that worthwhile achievements often require patience. Hope becomes grounded less in chance and more in competence. Social relationships play an important role in this process as well. Encouragement, constructive feedback, and emotionally consistent relationships provide experiences that challenge expectations formed under prolonged helplessness. Healthy communities remind individuals that setbacks do not define identity and that temporary failure does not eliminate future opportunity. The nervous system gradually learns that uncertainty can exist without constant danger and that disappointment can occur without becoming permanent. Meaning also begins returning as agency expands. During helplessness, attention becomes narrowly focused on avoiding failure. Curiosity fades because survival dominates awareness. As confidence slowly develops, attention broadens once again. The individual begins exploring rather than merely protecting. Goals reappear, creativity returns. Long-term planning becomes psychologically possible because the future no longer feels completely disconnected from present action. One of the most remarkable characteristics of human psychology is its capacity for revision. The brain continuously updates its understanding of the world based upon new experience. Expectations that once served an important adaptive function may eventually become outdated. Recovery depends upon giving the nervous system sufficient evidence to construct a more accurate model of present reality. Every successful action becomes another correction to earlier conclusions. This perspective also encourages compassion toward ourselves and others. When someone appears to have stopped trying, the absence of action does not necessarily reflect indifference or weakness. It may reflect years of accumulated learning in which effort repeatedly failed to produce meaningful change. Understanding this possibility shifts our attention from judgment toward curiosity. Instead of asking why someone refuses to act, psychology encourages us to ask what experiences may have taught them that action no longer matters. The relationship between intermittent reinforcement and learned helplessness ultimately reveals two complementary truths about the human mind. The first is that hope can sustain extraordinary persistence when the possibility of success remains alive. The second is that prolonged experiences of uncontrollable failure can gradually extinguish that hope by teaching the nervous system that effort has lost its influence. Both processes demonstrate the remarkable capacity of human beings to learn from experience. Perhaps the deepest lesson is not simply that the mind learns, but that it never completely stops learning. Every experience continues shaping expectations about the future. Every success, every setback, every meaningful relationship, and every act of personal agency contributes to the psychological model through which reality is interpreted. This ongoing process reminds us that neither persistence nor helplessness represents a permanent identity. They are patterns of learning that evolve as experience evolves. The psychology of intermittent reinforcement and learned helplessness, therefore, offers more than an explanation for why people continue trying or eventually give up. It provides a deeper understanding of how human beings construct expectations about themselves and the world around them. It reminds us that hope is strengthened when effort produces meaningful change, that helplessness emerges when control appears to disappear, and that recovery begins whenever experience once again demonstrates that our actions matter. The nervous system may learn resignation, but it can also learn confidence. It may learn fear, but it can also learn mastery. In that capacity for continual adaptation lies one of the most enduring sources of resilience within the human mind.